Hello and welcome back to Comics Over Time. This season, which we're calling Murdock and Marvel, a history of Marvel Comics starring Daredevil, we're breaking down the year in the comic book industry in two parts. In part one, we'll look at the state of the comic book industry as a whole, as well as what things were going on in society that may have impacted the comic book industry during that year. We'll talk big picture about what's going on at DC and independent comics, then we'll shift our focus to Marvel. We'll look at who is creating comics, what new characters or storylines were introduced, and which comics debuted or ended. In part 2, we'll dive deep into Marvel's longest-running characters, Matt Murdock. We'll look at what the year had in store for the Man Without Fear, key things that happened, and who joined or left his world before spotlighting one key issue or story. From there, we'll wrap up the year's discussion with a takeaway before moving on to another year and a whole new discussion. We're excited to have you join us on a trip through comic book history. We are back with part 2 of our discussion of 1997, the year with Daredevil. My name is Dwayne, and with me, as always, my good buddy Dan. Dan, we're back talking comics again, our man Daredevil. This should be a good time.
I really think so. I'm going to be interested also. I assume we're going to talk about all of his appearances this year in depth, correct? So, all 75 of them. The Marvel Valentine special, #1, I want to hear about from you. Untold Tales of Spider-Man 97. It's all gold, man. Gold.
No, probably not. We're going to focus on the main run like we normally do. To your point, the number of titles that Marvel is putting out, like in 1997, is far fewer than they were just a couple years ago. But the number of Matt Murdock / Daredevil appearances this year, still just, he is everywhere.
I wonder if that's partly because they got rid of the assistant or the editors that were in their little blocks, which meant that nobody was able to use characters from somebody else, place else. And if it's also because with all of the Avengers stuck in a pocket universe and the like, there's only so many characters left for crossovers. So he suddenly becomes a much more important part of the Marvel universe that remains.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. I had not even considered that as being some rationale as to why that could be, but that makes perfect sense. But let's jump in and let's talk about what happens this year with our man Daredevil. The year in Daredevil.
Dwayne, you've got a lot of stuff to cover for us, but it sounds like what we're going to stick to is Daredevil, and it's 360 to 370, so there's 11 issues, not 12. Is that correct?
There is 11 issues, and then Daredevil -1, the flashback issue that we talked about.
Right. Okay.
Because it felt weird to include that as part of the 360 to 370, but to your point, it was just folded right into the middle of the year.
No,
Issue
you're right.
365 before it, 366 after it, but right there in July, we had this -1 issue where we see Matt Murdock and his dad going off to college. But let's not get ahead of ourselves because that is going to be our spotlight story for this week.
Sounds good. So tell us a little bit about who's writing, penciling, what's going on this month or this year.
Yeah, so there's a whole ton of different places that Matt Murdock and Daredevil showed up this year. Notably, I guess he was in some Punisher books. He was in the Electra -1 issue as well as the main Elektra title. And then he was in a few different graphic novels as well, including a Kingpin graphic novel, which I think might have been kind of interesting. As far as the writing and creative credits for the main Daredevil run, we had Carl Kessel started the year, did issues 360 to 364, and then Joe Kelly took over with issue 365, wrote the -1 issue, and then finished out the rest of the year through 370. We met Carrie Nord partnered with Carl Kessel on most of those issues, but we also did see our man Gene Colan return on pencils for several issues, 363, the -1 issue, 366 to 368, and then 370. And then Ariel Olivita,
Sure.
Olividi, something like that. Did issue
I would say
369.
Olivetti.
Olivetti. Okay, there we go. Matt Ryan, Cam Smith and Paul Neary, Al Williamson, Bud LaRosa, and Pierre Brito had ink credits throughout this year. So
Yeah.
writing credit pretty stable, only 2. Starts to get a little bit more mix up when you're looking at the artwork this year. But all in all, this was a pretty good year. There was some really interesting things. We had Daredevil as one of the remaining heroes after the Onslaught event last year, and all the big time heroes, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, all those are missing and presumed dead. And we saw a little bit of that at the end of 1996, but that continues this year, and so we get a lot of that with regards to the year as it plays out within the comic itself. So if we look at the comic, the year begins with Daredevil taking on the Absorbing Man as he tries to take down New York City with no Avengers in sight to stop him. And while that's going on, we learn why Foggy was so keen on partnering with Rosalind Sharp, the woman who wanted Murdock and Nelson to join her as partners in a new law firm. Foggy really wanted to do it. Matt wasn't so sure and basically was blackmailed into, if Foggy gets to join, then Matt has to join. Otherwise, neither of them go. Yeah, she's Foggy's biological mother.
Yep.
So I think you made a joke about that, possibly her being old enough to be Foggy's mother.
I may have had previous knowledge of this a while ago, so yeah. But it was sort of telegraphed, but not necessarily telegraphed in the stories. So I don't know if you did it come as a surprise to you, having not already known?
I'm gonna tell you that it actually did come as a surprise to me. I didn't see it coming necessarily, and maybe I'm not didn't read between the lines closely enough, but yeah.
They also don't really make her look that old. Like if you look at Foggy's mom and her, they do not look like women who are the same age. So she's drawn much younger than you would think Foggy's mom would be. So
it is Rosalind Sharp who thinks Foggy and the firm need to play up Foggy's best bud status with our man Daredevil, which leads to work for the firm as Molten Man, a.k.a. Mark Roxton, seeks help with break-ins at the Osborne Chemicals. Daredevil is reunited with Black Widow as the pair take down the Grey Gargoyle, who's the one doing the breaking in there. So this was really weird because Foggy goes from not knowing that Matt Murdock is Daredevil to suddenly becoming like the PR guy for Daredevil that the media and everybody goes to when they want to know the status of Daredevil. And it's almost overnight. It's actually kind of crazy.
And the weird thing is that, theoretically, even when he didn't know, Daredevil was always hanging out at Nelson and Murdock's offices, and their clients would always end up somehow being saved by Daredevil. So this could have happened at any point. It's not really related necessarily to the fact that he's found out about it. But yeah, he's terrible at this whole secret thing too. It really is not. It's not going to end well, I'm afraid. So
yeah, he sort of freaks out every time he's asked about Daredevil and all this sort of thing. So it's just oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's a mess.
So as we continue, we learn a little bit more about Rosalind Sharp and her past after Daredevil saves her from an armed man in the firm's lobby and then follows her to visit the gangster responsible. That was kind of, so, it seemed like there was some bad blood between Foggy's mom that raised him and Rosalind Sharp, and so you didn't really understand why, and then we kind of learn that she's tough as nail. She's razor sharp for that matter. That's where that moniker comes from. And
Yep.
dealing with gangsters and stuff was part of her thing back in the day.
And it seems like she's essentially been protected by this particular gangster. So I'm not exactly sure, but it's almost like he tried to have her killed just so she'd come visit him. Like he was relatively confident nothing bad was actually going to happen. He's just like, hey, I wanted you to come and hang out because,
Well,
So.
yeah, because they kind of had this like mutually insured destruction scenario going on where she had dirt on him, he had dirt on her, yet somehow he decided to take a pop shot at her in her office, no less. And then so she goes to visit him and basically is like, I don't have to worry about you killing me because if you would have been sick, I've got things in place that if you did hurt me, then all this stuff would come out about you and all this sort of thing. So it's a little weird.
Yeah. I'm not sure this part of the plot makes a lot of sense. But what we find out kind of is that she's shady.
Yes.
Like she's very much shady.
Yes. So next up, we get a multi-book story involving a new villainess, actually, Insomnia, trying to keep Daredevil and the rest of New York up at night. We eventually learn she's working for Mr. Fear, who himself is causing trouble by enlisting a friend of Molten Man's to release a gas during an Osborne Chemicals boardroom meeting, which causes Roxton to freak out and start tearing up the place before Daredevil can come in and sort of calm him down and make things back to normal. This was kind of interesting. The new villain was okay, I guess. She was more kind of, I feel like she was kind of like pestering Karen Page a little bit too.
Well, she's like running the Fisk radio station, sort of.
Yes. Yeah,
And-
that's what it's.
And the show that Karen is now doing, somehow her getting the ratings was important because they were using it to somehow play a frequency which would keep people up at night or cause them trouble or something like this, almost like addicting them to radio. So it was very weird. There were a lot of things going on with this particular storyline. But yeah, basically she was sort of, this subsidiary villain to Mr. Fear in the end, trying to get him the stuff he needs to go with his master plan. So
that leads us, before we get a resolution to the Mr. Fear story, we get a flashback issue of Daredevil called Daredevil -1, in which Jack Murdock is taking his son Matt to college. This story from writer Joe Kelly and art by Gene Colan and Matt Ryan is a lot of fun and actually going to be our spotlight story for this week. So I won't spend a lot of time on it here, but it really was sort of just wedged into this like ongoing story with Mr. Fear that was, I could definitely see why if you were a Daredevil fan, you're like, I'm going to go into the store, I'm going to get my new issue of Daredevil, find out what's going on with Mr. Fear and Insomnia and all this, and suddenly we get this issue.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun, though. It was a good issue, and we're going to talk about it, but I could see why it didn't go over well.
I think some of them were less well received. This one probably is one of the better ones. I really enjoyed this issue. So.
Right. So returning back to the present time, Daredevil must once again deal with Mr. Fear plotting, this time at Rikers Island when Fear releases a gas to start a prison riot. Daredevil must take on the new and improved Gladiator as a result. And the thing that... So the new Gladiator looked menacing as all heck. He's got like a new and improved suit and wanted to take down Daredevil. Mr. Fear just sort of disappears during this. And I'm going to tell you, I was like, what happened to Mr. Fear as a result of this? Because we didn't really get anything about him and like why he was doing this or what the result was. And then like how this had anything to do with what was going on. And then we jump into next a story that has nothing to do with Mr. Fear. So he just sort of falls off the radar here.
Well, it seems like Daredevil had foiled his plot with the poison, and then Fear had gotten his billy club, and at that point Fear realized who Daredevil really was the blind lawyer. So he has one of the guys in Rikers convince Murdock to come out to Rikers so that he can, like, help him with something. And then that sets the trap where he's like, now Daredevil is out at Rikers. He's in his disguise. I'm going to start a prison riot with a bunch of Fear. And I assume the thought is Daredevil's going to get killed and he'll have his revenge. And that doesn't happen. So then maybe he just skulks away and, I'll get you next time, Daredevil, type of thing. So
would have gotten away with it too if it hadn't been for that rascally blind lawyer.
That's exactly it.
So yeah, but he ends up taking down Gladiator. I did like the new costume for the Gladiator. Thought he looked really cool. This was one of the Gene Colan books, so we've seen Gene Colan do Gladiator before, and then we got to see him do it again, and I really enjoyed it. Actually,
I would agree.
So, as I mentioned, the year then ends with a multi-book storyline called Widow's Kiss that starts with Daredevil helping a firm client who's facing a hostile takeover by the Russians, only to then have to tangle with Omega Red. Black Widow comes to the aid of Daredevil, only to then shoot him herself. She tries to then save Daredevil by bringing him to Karen for help before returning to meet with a Russian general we eventually learn that she's been trying to take down. Despite being shot, Daredevil goes after the Widow and gets himself and the Black Widow captured. And the story ends with Daredevil escaping and convincing Ursa Major and the Vanguard that they're being used by said general, and that he's been running experiments on Vanguard's sister, Darkstar, thus getting them to turn on the general and foil his plot. So it was really interesting and definitely quite a turn when we see, Black Widow helping Daredevil 1 minute take down Omega Red, and then basically she just sort of turns around and says, you're going to regret this, and then shoots him, basically. And then the very next issue, we see a full panel right at the beginning where she is standing at the apartment door for Karen Page has opened the door, and Daredevil is in her arms bleeding out. And she's like, here, take him. I gotta go.
Yes. And so she saves him. She brings him back, specifically deposits him someplace by shooting him so that he won't get in the way and ruin the special op she's on with S.H.I.E.L.D. And what does he do? He gets out of bed, he leaves, and he immediately goes and finds a way to ruin the special op that she's on with S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yes. So
he's completely, just a disaster. He messes up everything twice.
Yes, not to mention the fact that Karen Page is absolutely livid that he's even considering going after her, and is like, I'm putting my foot down, and the relationship is not going to be in a good place if you leave, and I'm going to count to 3 and you're going to be here. And she gets to 2 and he's already gone. And it's just oh my goodness, man.
Yep. It's the way it goes. So yeah, he's a mess. And of course, at the end, the other thing is, not only does he get at least 2 kisses from Black Widow during this, but at the very end of it, he's like, oh, well, at least I got my friend back. So he's walking out with his arm around Black Widow while the little lady is at home waiting for him. We'll see how this goes.
It's not good. It's not good.
Luckily, we know Matt's not the kind of guy to go ahead and get himself in trouble messing around with multiple women. So,
sure, something like that.
I'm sure this is going to end well.
So one other secondary story that sort of ran throughout the entire year actually involves Foggy Nelson and Liz Osborne. See, Rosalind Sharp isn't pleased about their relationship and continually tries to undermine it with other women, no less. In the final book of the year, Foggy and Liz attempt to have this romantic evening together, and it is completely derailed when he receives a constant stream of phone calls from these other women, and that keep leaving messages on his answering machine that they're listening to, and it's like one's a supermodel, and one of them's a drunk Karen Page, and one of them is another woman who Liz doesn't know, but it's actually Candace Nelson, Foggy's sister, talking about coming to New York and partying with him and all this sort of thing. And he's just like, nobody calls me ever until I have a romantic night at home. And then suddenly everybody calls me. It was actually quite humorous.
Foggy is relatable sometimes. Although the whole his mom setting him up with a supermodel thing goes against everything that we've come to know about Foggy. I mean, that's just. But she has expectations for him. So,
yes.
Such is the way. Yeah, I found that odd. I do like, though, that Foggy's getting stories and arcs, and he's got kind of an actual place. You know, he matters now in the story in a way that really he didn't for a long time. Same thing with Karen. She's got her own thing going on. That thing is sort of her own job and the like. She still hangs around the law office a lot, more than you'd figure somebody was who doesn't actually have a job there. But I've actually really enjoyed that. The weird thing is that this year, the last year or so, has felt like classic Daredevil. And I mean, even more when that first book, when Gene Colan comes back, and you just open it and you're like, oh baby, we're back. This
feels right. This feels like home. We've seen so many books like this that it's just like, yeah, it does. He came back with issue 363, and then he went away for a little bit, and then did the -1 issue, and then like all the rest of the issue, most of the rest of the issues for the remainder of the year, and it just it felt like Daredevil, like even more so.
And I feel bad about, it's not that Kerry Nord in any way wasn't good. I actually really liked the art in the early books that he does as well. But he's got a very clean, very bright almost kind of line. Like all of the Daredevil books in the early part, they feel like they're all set in daytime, really. Because he's got just a style that is very open. And then you get to 363, and it's like, somebody just turned out the lights. The first page is basically half black, and you've got this sort of hanging face of Black Widow in the middle of it, and an elongated Daredevil. And it's just like a 1970s Daredevil. Like Colan came back and just never left, And it felt just beautiful. So I love his art. And the thing is, he's like 70 years old at this point, and still just kicking the asses of the young guys around comics on a regular basis. His composition is flawless, and everything's a fight with big bombastic, like figures and the like. Women are beautiful. Just the mood of the books is perfect. It's chef's kiss.
Well, that's the year for Daredevil. He had. It felt good, and like I can see, like with everything else that was going on at Marvel at the time, I think like this had to have been one of the sort of, I have to think it was probably one of the better sort of just this is the book, and it just sort of went and was kind of on autopilot, and it just did the thing it does, and how it's always done. It feels like for quite a long time.
So it's the Jan Brady book of the year. It's not causing trouble. It's not adorable. It's just sort of like, this is just a book that got it done and probably didn't cause the editor trouble because everybody looked like they were professionals, and away you go. It's not winning Eisners, but it was just solid entertainment. So I really enjoyed this year. I think that after a lot of the stuff that had gone on, just they had good villains. brought back a lot of the characters, getting to see Black Widow again, the fact that we've got a lot of his original cast reestablished, just the craziness of the Miller and Nocenti years kind of getting a little bit of calm.
I think it's just sort of from a narration standpoint, like I can tell you about a year of Daredevil, and I don't have to be like, okay, so here's all this other stuff you need to know, and it's like here's this is gonna sound weird, but and then like you could just sort of explain it, and it just sort of makes sense, right?
Yep.
And sometimes that's all you need. It just that's all I want is just an entertaining story with characters that I like. I to your point, I love the fact that Foggy now seems to have a more important place in the stories, and Karen Page is more than just Matt Murdock's girl in these stories as well, and so it was a great year, and like I don't think I could have asked for more if I was going into the year being like, what do you want to see out of Daredevil this year?
Yep. Yeah, I will note that as we are proceeding along in our rewatch, I am increasingly angry at Kevin Smith every week, and you'll find out why in a little while. But I'd forgotten certain things and how things worked in the chronology, that now as we approach the Kevin Smith era, I'm a little bit more furious all the time. It's just a warning there that there will probably be angry words from me at some point in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Well, 4 to 5 weeks, I suppose. So.
Sure. And that's so we talk about the year as a whole, but the standout book to me this year is the flashback book, which is a complete out of chronology story that was just parachuted into the middle of the year that we're gonna focus on in our spotlight now. This week's spotlight story.
Dwayne, all right, here we have it. Daredevil -1. This is issue 365.5 from July of 1997. It's called A Time to Say Farewell. What was the reason you chose this as our spotlight?
This is very much a surprised issue to me when I got to it. But this is, first and foremost, this is classic Daredevil at its best, even though it's not classic Daredevil, because this is, as it's touted on the cover of the issue, before there was Daredevil, there was Matt Murdock. So this is a Matt Murdock story without any Daredevil in it. So that's kind of the first thing, is we have a Daredevil story without Daredevil in it. A classic Daredevil story without Daredevil in it. The Gene Colan cover with Bud LaRosa looks fantastic. It's got also starring Foggy Nelson and a little circle with Foggy's head in it. And I just really loved the fact that they touted this. We have in the opening pages a cameo by Stan Lee as the bus driver, explaining that this is an out of continuity story from back in the early days of Matt Murdock.
I love that, by the way, that there is something very like 60s Marvel about that. It feels like this not only, and even the covers, the cover is sort of reminiscent almost of Daredevil #1. So the art styles and the cover dress and all the rest is sort of reminiscent of 60s Marvel. You've got Stan Lee on the bus. This feels to me like a what if story. Like
it does.
If Stan Lee is the Watcher in a what if story. But in actual fact, other than the fact that it can't, I mean, it's essentially established that Stan Lee was a bus driver someplace in New York in the late 60s or whatever. So outside of that, this is in continuity. And so this is actually something that happens. It feels exactly like a what if story.
Yeah. I would, having not read a ton of what if, stories, the few that I have read definitely felt a lot like this. So let's talk about what happens here. So it is the fall in New York City when Matt Murdock and his father, Batlin Jack Murdock, are traveling upstate via bus to State College, where Matt is going to be going to college. Arriving there, Jack insists on carrying his pack, proud that Matt is the first Murdock to go to college. After a run-in with one of the older students who nearly knocks Matt over while jogging, they walk into an orientation building. There, the State College Dean, Arthur Duford, begins speaking to the freshman class when he notices Matt is blind and points him and his father to an orientation for special students. But Jack insists that his son has worked hard to get him there and that he's the future valedictorian and shouldn't miss the speech. Afterwards, as they walk to the dormitory, Matt is annoyed that his father is embarrassing him. Know the feeling there. Once inside, he finds Franklin Nelson and his family's chauffeur, Fitzroy, moving a TV into a shared room, expressing hope that his roommate will appreciate it. But when Matt makes himself known, Franklin quickly realizes that Matt is blind only after putting his foot in his mouth and tells him to call him Foggy. The two roommates shake hands, and then Foggy invites him to dinner, and with him and Fitzroy at a fancy restaurant, but Matt says him and his father want to have a quieter dinner at a place less crowded. So that's kind of the first part of this. So we get to see kind of Matt and Foggy's first meeting and all this sort of thing. And the thing that jumped out to me, I guess, as I was reading this is we talked about this being in continuity, but this felt a little out of continuity to me because I always felt like Jack died before Matt had gone to college. Am I completely mistaken in kind of the original chronology of everything happening?
So I have two answers to that.
Okay.
The first answer is yes, that you are correct, completely incorrect. And the second answer is no, because you started with Daredevil, the Netflix series. And in the Netflix series, I think he dies when Matt is a kid. And I think in the comics, he dies when Matt is like in college or right around the time that Matt is old enough that he can almost immediately turn into Daredevil and take vengeance on the crooks.
Well, I know the accident occurs when he's a kid.
Yep.
And but like I guess I always assumed that the kind of the fixer and him getting shot for not throwing the fight was when Matt Murdock was probably 16, 17 years old. And that maybe we're talking like a year or two difference here. I guess that was my thinking on things, but maybe he was more like 19 or 20.
So I actually looked this up because when I saw your note, I'm like, I agree that it seems weird because he does seem like when they normally talk about it that I'm sure, in fact, I've even seen some flashback scenes where essentially Batlin Jack is killed in the alley, and then a young Matt Murdock tries to get there to find out what's been going on, and like a policeman or somebody stops him, or even one of the bad guys sort of just like knocks him back. But it is inconclusive in some ways, even in the Marvel Universe. But evidently, according to at least a couple of like the Frank Miller ones and stuff like that, his dad was actually killed while he was an adult, at least 18 years old or something like that. Okay. So, but again, it is. I think there are certain scenes where it looks different than that.
Sure, because I mean we get several retellings of that origin story, and I feel like at least in a couple of those instances, it felt like the look of the story made me think that he was more of a high schooler than he was a college age when his dad dies.
I will also say that I think it's probably just a reflexive Batman thing.
That could also be true, too.
That almost every superhero whose parents are not alive died tragically when they were a child to somehow or another inspire them to go about their path of vengeance. And for Daredevil, he was evidently a little older. I actually had always kind of thought in my head that he was young too, that essentially it was him being blinded in the accident that caused his dad to feel he needed additional money, sending him down that path. And then, that Matt was in the audience that night, that he would have been a young guy who was still living at home who would have gone to see or whatever.
Right.
But in actual fact, according to the official chronologies, evidently he was college aged. So this can happen. But it felt weird to me too. It's actually one of the other reasons why initially I was thinking it was a what if story. Oh, isn't this cool? It's a story where Matt's dad lives long enough to actually see him off to college. What a cool story. But in actual fact, it's canon. Again, though, different from the Netflix show where he did actually, his dad was killed while he was a kid. So in the MCU, it's different.
The other thing that I liked about this is we didn't get to see much of the interaction, the relationship between Matt Murdock and Jack Murdock. And so getting more time with these two characters and getting to see how they interacted, we basically, that whole thing happens in issue 1 and then Jack's gone. And so outside of some flashbacks here and there, we haven't really gotten much of the Matt Murdock, Jack Murdock relationship. And so this was fun seeing those two interact, and they interact like I think every father and son interacts. The dad is proud of his son, the son is embarrassed of the dad, and it worked on a lot of cases.
This is probably the best characterization of Jack Murdock that I've ever seen. The first time really that you get to see, because usually he's sort of this imposing force who's like, don't you hit people, Right. And in this one he gets to actually be sort of that guy who's got all of his hopes and dreams wrapped up in his kid, and he is trying to do right by him. He's worried whether what his wife would think if she was there. We get a lot of development to the character of his dad that we'd never had before. So I think it was really good.
That development continues here because Matt and Jack end up going to dinner at a rough-looking establishment called the Ale House Bar and Grill. There, Jack asks his son if he thinks his mother would be proud of how he raised him, and Matt says he knows that they've had it tough, but he's always had food on the table and a present under the Christmas tree, laughter in the house, and most of all, always felt safe. But Jack regrets that he wasn't there for Matt when he really needed him, when he had the accident that blinded him for life, and Matt realizes how guilty his father still feels over that incident. It explains why he's so worried about the idea of Matt being on his own now that he's going to college. So now while Jack visits the restroom, 3 young men, one of them named Benji, tries to pick a fight with Matt, assuming that he's a rich kid who looks down on the local folks, and continues even after he realizes that Matt Murdock is blind. Jack returns to find the men surrounding Matt and immediately grabs Benji. Before he can punch him, Matt stops the fight, and then Benji pulls out a knife and talks his father out of fighting when that happens. So the two leave the bar. Jack is worried that college isn't a safe place for his son, whom he believes isn't able to protect himself. So we really get like that whole scene in the restaurant bar thing, that additional development, and hearing that Jack is feeling guilty about the incident that he had no control over and all this sort of thing. It's it was, yeah, it really tugged at the heartstrings.
Well, and I think it makes sense that, he has always wanted Matt to be somebody who goes down the academic route and all of this stuff. But also, it's a world so completely out of his norm, that this is the first Murdock going to college and all the rest and everything like that. So he's just, everything about it is kind of messing with him. Also, there's that lower middle class or lower class sort of thing going on where Matt and his dad are not rich and Foggy is rich. We often don't see all of the wealth because they're always like trying to make payments and everything. But probably the only thing that explains how Murdock and Nelson has stayed in business with their shoddy practices for 50 years is that literally, Foggy comes from this incredibly rich family. So he fails upward into being the DA, and he fails upward into being a partner at a law firm, and he literally can be useless, and somehow he's still going to be entrusted with all sorts of wealth and power. So he is definitely from a different world, and you kind of see a little bit of that too. You don't see a lot of them, but they meet up in the room, and then their dads take them completely different places.
Yeah. The fights between the local kids and the supposed rich kid there, it's like, okay, yeah, I could definitely see that. But then when they keep hassling him after they realize he's blind, I'm like, come on, this is, you guys are no good. They're definitely making it's like, okay, you can empathize with them, and then suddenly, okay, they're picking out a blind kid, so now they're definitely the bad guys, and so. We're gonna make this crystal clear when they get their comeuppance here by the end of this issue. So,
foreshadowing.
Yes, and I like that Matt had to talk his dad out of a fight. His dad, the boxer, he had to be talked out of a fight here. But so as this continues. Making an excuse that he's too tired to head back home right away, Jack pretends to sleep in the dorm room with Foggy and Matt, but waits until he can sneak out again to teach those young men at the bar a lesson with his fists. So he's going to go back and, show them what for. But by the time he reaches the bar, Matt, who could tell his father was lying about the reason for staying the night, has already run back there himself and has provoked Benji into attacking him. Instead, Matt easily takes out all three young men while pretending to be clumsy and forces Benji to say uncle, telling him that he expects to be treated civilly the next time he dines here and that it is his new favorite restaurant. Jack Murdock claps for his son, who tells him his father's taught him how to take care of himself. The next morning, Jack leaves by bus before breakfast, no longer worried that Matt, who carries himself like a man without fear. I love the fact that they put the whole, you're holding yourself like a man without fear. He actually says that, and it's like, this is. If there wasn't anything more classic about this issue, I think the fact that the way it ended and using that line, I think really sort of summed it up, and I think one of the reasons I really liked this issue.
Yeah, this fills in a gap too, to where it's nice that you see that his dad actually knows what's going on, and his dad knows that he is going to be able to take care of himself. Where if he died when he was young, leaving an orphan kid who essentially his mom's gone and now his dad's gone, and they have no real money, and the kids got a visual handicap. It's like that would be a sad story for a dad. But now it's kind of like when he was fighting the fight, probably knowing that there was going to be some retribution, he could do it on his own terms, not worried about whether he was leaving his kid in a bad situation, because he kind of already knew that Matt was going to be okay. I think it fixes an ethical plot hole there, where
Sure.
if he didn't know that his son had these sort of special abilities, and if the kid was younger, then not taking the fall and getting himself killed and leaving Matt to fend for himself was a little bit of a less honorable thing to do. So I think it fixes the character a little bit in some ways too.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So yeah, so this was not an issue I was expecting. It's not an issue I thought I needed going into it, but this was my favorite issue of the year, and I am very happy that we got it.
Yeah, I think these are cool little like a little Easter egg, something you didn't expect, but which definitely was welcome. This reminded me actually of the relationship between Barry Allen and his dad on the first few seasons of The Flash. And I don't know if you ever watched the Flash CW show, but
no.
It's a fantastic adaptation of the Flash story. And they did a really good job of dealing with Barry and his dad in that. And this kind of felt a little bit like that. So I was very pleased with it. So, but yeah, the continuity error thing, I literally had to look it up because I'm like, did he get to college? So there is one other thing about the college thing though, and that is that they've got him going to state college.
Yes.
And almost every other Daredevil story, including most of the Frank Miller stuff, have him going to Columbia.
Columbia, yeah. I did notice that as well.
And so the only way, if both him and Foggy went to state college, and then both of them transferred to Columbia, and in the middle part they'd sort of lost touch of each other with state college and then became friends as roommates again when they re-met each other at Columbia, that's the only way it actually makes sense. So maybe we just forget that. So,
yeah, okay.
Because yeah, there's things where the two of them meet at Columbia as well. So
yeah,
such is the way.
All right, I think we've wrapped up the discussion of our spotlight issue. Dan, you want to throw some rapid fire Daredevil questions at us so we can talk about the year a little bit more?
I'm going to start with a tough one for you. Who is Matt Murdock in love with this year?
So it's in theory Karen Page, though he definitely has a funny way of showing it, swinging out on her despite being shot to chase after the one who shot him, and then kissing her and kind of walking off into the sunset after they foil the general's plan. Oh gosh. I wish I could say this is something new for Matt Murdock, but this does sort of seem like a recurring issue with Matt Murdock.
There's a pattern here, you say?
There is a bit of a pattern.
The first kiss you can forgive because they passed a lockpick, so that was. But then the next one, just bad business. Who is the biggest villain of the year?
So, Mr. Fear, I would say, is the one that causes the most trouble throughout the year, whether it's him alone or somebody that he's working with.
Yep, and then because it's either him or somebody he's hired and the like seems to be behind a lot of it. Did we see Matt practicing law this year?
So we see Matt in the law office of Sharp, Nelson, and Murdock, or I think that's the yeah. But we never actually see him in the courtroom this year. He's not actually doing any trial work this year.
I think Rosalind Sharp asks this question almost every issue. Is Matt
yes,
Murdock practicing law?
He doesn't have any billable hours. You might want to get on that a little bit.
Does anyone know Matt's identity?
No one knows about the Daredevil, but we do get Foggy as the public spokesperson for Daredevil this year, which is new, and like we said, did not seem like it was going particularly well, both for Daredevil or for Foggy.
Are you sure Mr. Fear didn't find out?
Well, I suppose Mr. Fear did, yes,
because he got the Billy Club, And then he converted into a blind man's walking cane. And he's
That
like,
is,
oh.
yeah, that is true. That is
and
true.
that's why he lured him in. So I think Mr. Fear learned.
Yes.
But I don't think
Yeah,
he told
you were
anybody.
right.
He just kept it for his own devious knowledge and plans.
Yes. Kind of
Daredevil
like
changing the
Kingpin.
equipment.
Kind of like
Yeah.
Kingpin did. Yeah.
I think so, exactly. Daredevil change his outfit or equipment at all?
No outfit changes or any changes to the Billy Club this year that I could think of.
I don't believe so either. Anything new about Matt's past?
That entire -1 issue,
Yep.
him going off to college with his dad, I think was great. I loved it, and definitely we got to see something.
Yep. And what's the biggest moment of the year?
So to me, it's Black Widow shooting Daredevil at the end of issue 368, and then the follow-up full-page panel at the start of issue 369, where she's holding him as he's sort of bleeding out at the front door of the apartment. Obviously, there was rationale for it, and we end up finding out what that is, as does Daredevil as well. But in the moment, it was rather shocking to see that happen.
So yeah, I think that's a pretty good one. That was a really good visual, and that was an interesting turning point. Our big question: was Daredevil still a good guy this year?
This feels like this should be an easy question, but yet it always feels difficult to answer every time I come to trying to figure out an answer for this. And again this year, I find myself struggling with it again. I think as much as it is possible for him to be a good guy, he is. I mean, he's stopping bad guys. He's trying with his friends, but his friends he's treating just about as badly as he's dealing with bad guys. I mean, he's not being good to Karen, and like Foggy's trying to be better with him, but that seems kind of weird too. So I don't know. It's really hard to say.
I think Daredevil is a good guy this year. He keeps keeping the Black Widow from killing people, and he himself is swinging around mostly doing good things and the like. The Karen thing is, obviously for the most part, right up until the last couple issues, he'd been no trouble. He'd been doing really well, and the Black Widow's the Black Widow. I mean, what do you do when Scarlett Johansson just wanders in and starts luring you? So it's not all his fault, but yeah, I think that this is one of the years when he has been least mopey and least doing something shitty that he shouldn't be of any of the last 5 or 6 years. He doesn't run around with guns. He's not throwing anybody out of windows. He's not actively sleeping with his non-girlfriend. So
Sure.
we have to grade this man on a curve a little bit.
I was going to say, this seems like a pretty heavy curve that we're grading him at Murdock on, actually. Yeah. All right. I'll agree with that, I guess. But I think that actually wraps it up for Daredevil this year. This was, like we said, it was a pretty good year, and I've got hopes that 1998 is going to be a good follow-up year, but things are changing though, and I'm already into the year, and yeah, things have happened. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Just with Daredevil wrapped up, I think it is time to move on and talk about the takeaway for 1997. This week's takeaway. All right, Dan, it is the takeaway for 1997, the year that followed one of the worst years in comics and was probably worse as far as things go. What if you think about 1997 and you're going to talk about it to somebody, what's the takeaway for this year?
I mean, the takeaway is this is the year that the bills came due. Marvel is bankrupt. They have to give up a lot of their aspirations as far as vertical integration, and they really brought down the entire comic industry. There's a lot of folks out there who, when they talk about 1997 and the end of sort of the Heroes World distribution stuff, that there are numerous, probably hundreds of comic book shops that closed directly because of Marvel deciding to screw up the distribution system and cause them not to get their books, not to be able to keep their customers, not to be able to expand their customer base. So this was the year, more than any, where comic books really fell apart. So 96 was a bad year. 96 is the year we get the declaration of the bankruptcy. Things are falling. But 97 is the year we bottom out. 98 is, in most critical ways, 98 is better than 97. And 96 is better than 97. 97 is the valley. It's the place where it looks most like we're just doomed. Because for a lot of the year, Marvel is in bankruptcy and might just go bankrupt. DC is having a tough time selling books, even though they're now supposedly the industry leader. A lot of the independents are having a lot of trouble. And the takeaway for me is that Marvel, as the industry leader, really did not protect the industry the way they needed to. And they're in their sort of onrush to try and gain market share, and Perlman's attempt to just go, well, we're making money at comics, let's make more money at comics, let's make more money printing more comics. Eventually he just ruined the entire ecosystem. And even when you look at the other things that came out with that, the X-Men deciding to print multiple covers and sell 8 million copies, and now suddenly you've got the Darkness with 11 copies or 9 different covers or whatever. The entire model that Marvel has been sort of working on was a house of cards. And it just, when it fell, it took down Marvel. It took down all sorts of other publishers. It took down sort of the comic industry for a generation. We lost a lot of young people. The kids who were 10 years old in the 90s, there are a lot less of them who are comic fans now than kids who were 10 years old in the 80s or kids who were 10 years old in the 70s. That's partly because of the internet and everything else, but it's also just because that was an entire crop that just never got watered. And unfortunately, I think that this is the year where we kind of see that if they don't get their house in order along with everybody else, comics literally could fall off the map permanently. So next year is when they and everybody else have to start getting their crap together. But it really does have to be Marvel before everybody else, because Marvel has wiped out so much of the competition and the rest of the industry that if they can't fix themselves, it's going to be bad for everybody.
That makes sense, and definitely feels like that's how things were. And I can't. I wouldn't. I guess I should have expected that that's how this was going to end up, given how things were going to get us to this point. But yet, it's and it's interesting that it's even with movies and stuff, it's like the best comic book movie didn't even market itself as a comic book movie. It's like we were so just not in a comic book space anymore that they're distancing themselves from it.
Well, and to be quite frank, by the 90s, if you'd have marketed it as a comic book movie, people would have not known what to expect. Because in the 90s, superheroes had become almost completely synonymous already with the comic book genre. People didn't think Archie or Richie Rich when they thought about comics. They thought about Superman and Batman. So something that was kind of a goofy science fiction movie I would say even today, even if you tell them that it's based on a comic book, most people would not define Men in Black as a comic book movie.
Yeah. Though it does now make a lot of sense thinking about the thinking about the movie. It does feel very comic book-esque, just sort of.
That is true.
Just kind of the craziness of everything and the humor that's in there and everything. It just sort of feels like it definitely feels like a precursor to, what we ended up seeing as being very popular comic book movies.
It could be, it would fit in thematically with like Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. This was a very interesting discussion. And I'm very curious to see what this industry looks like in 1998 as we start kind of slowly going back up again. It was such the dizzying heights, and then this fall into an absolute crater that we're in this year, and now we're going to slowly have to start working our way back out of it again.
Yeah, and it's a long slog. Just as a note, the glory days are behind us for a while, and in actual fact, it's the pandemic, really, that brings the comic book industry out of this.
It takes that long.
As weird as it is. I mean, not in terms of stability and great stuff, but in terms of really getting to the point where the industry is breaking sales records again. It's basically the pandemic that gets us back to where we were in the 90s.
I suppose that does make some sense.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got a few years to get to that, I guess. But we'll have some discussions about some years in between there. But until then, let's wrap it up for us for this week. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. If you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you'd share this show via social media or leave us a review. That'll help other new listeners find the show that much easier. Now, whether you're new to the podcast or you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. You can send them to us via email. That address is comments@comicsovertime.com, or you can reach out to us via social media. We're on X or Blue Sky @comicsovertime. Dan, a flashback issue was my favorite issue of Daredevil for 1997. I can only imagine what we're going to be spotlighting in a couple weeks when we get to Daredevil 1998.
It will be interesting. We're getting to that time, so I will be interested to see which one you choose. But for now, this has been a lot of fun. Had a great time. Fun books.
Until next week, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.